Hello and welcome back to When Hope Endures with Mabel and Wesley. Today we have Ian with us. He had a stroke at the age of 25 as a result of a tubing accident, and we would love to hear his story.
Excellent. Thank you. So if we rewind back to 2014, that was when the accident was. And leading up to that, 2013, I'd gotten married in November of that year. So this is 9 months prior to the actual stroke. But I was in school. I was down at BYU. Ironically, I was studying neuroscience
Okay.
and Spanish. And so I'd taken a number of courses that are related to neuroanatomy and things like that. And I say it's ironic just because that's what the stroke is all about. It was actually one of the main units that I had in school just before having a stroke. So married in November of 2013. Now, if we fast forward to July of 2014, my wife's family, new wife, her family goes down to Lake Powell every year. Huge staple here in Utah. It's a blast.
Yeah.
And tubing is a big part of that for everyone that goes there. And for me, it was huge. Growing up, I was very active as far as sports go. You name it, basketball, football, baseball, soccer was a big one for me. But anything extreme as well. Tubing was a big part of actually my growing up.
Right.
I would kind of bear hug, get my arms around the tube and try and barrel roll in the water and try and get back up and continue tubing on. So many iterations of that, of falling off the tube and crashing and just having a good time. So down there, Lake Powell is like a paradise for that, just because there's so much space. The water's warm, unlike growing up in Washington where it's a little colder. But this time, my uncle was driving the boat, and I was on the tube with my then brother-in-law, and I just said, "Hey, give it to us, like whip us around, have a good time." And I did a couple of donuts in the circle and then pulled through it. And as he pulled through it, there was some massive wakes in the middle.
Right.
That's what you hope for.
That's what you look forward to.
Exactly.
Right.
Like, that's the whole point of it. And it hit just right, though, to where the tube kind of smacked down, and then I popped off the tube and felt like I was 50 feet in the air.
Wow.
Must have been like 5, but got flipped around and landed perfectly on my back to where it gave me whiplash with my head backwards. And it just rung my bell. I remember getting up, and I actually have a video of it from like a little action cam on the tube, and I get up out of the water like, "Oh, that killed my neck." And you hear me yell that. And that's all I thought it was, though. It was pretty tame, actually. Carried on at Lake Powell. That was July 10th that day. Carried on at Lake Powell for the next few days.
I mean, it's very common to be thrown from a tube and sometimes to be a little sore from it, so you weren't really thinking anything about it.
It was nothing new.
Right.
It was same old, same old. Part of the course for tubing. And so, that was it. And went home, and that was July 10th. For the next 3-4 weeks, had whiplash-like symptoms. And so I had a headache, sore neck, sore muscles. But again, just kind of part of the course. And looking back, hindsight's 20/20, right? But looking back, I say, okay, those symptoms lasted quite a while. I should have probably done something about it.
Right.
But, I mean, you drive yourself crazy thinking about the shoulda, coulda, woulda stuff. So, again, I was at BYU still, just taking clinical anatomy. One of the units was stroke. And the morning of August 7th, which is a Thursday, I had a work shift at the network operations center, which is 2 floors below campus in like a secured area, and rode my bike to work and logged into my station. As I was logging into my computer station, my vision was off. Instead of seeing things in like a fluid motion or when you pan left to right, it was in frames. It was choppy. And that motion or whatever from the vision, it made me nauseous. And so I stumbled to the bathroom because walking was difficult with vision being so off. Got to the bathroom and I immediately threw up. And right as soon as I threw up, there was a pins and needles tingling sensation that started on the right side, only the right side, started in my toes and quickly worked its way up perfectly down the midline on that right side up to about my chin. And I immediately thought, oh, something's going on. So stumbled back to my station, which was probably like a 50-yard walk down a hallway. And this was at 6 a.m. and just said, hey, something's going on, guys, to my coworkers. I think I need to go to the hospital. And called my wife, and she had a kind of a later work shift. And she was like, okay, let me get ready, gather my stuff. And I don't usually go to the doctor. So she was like, oh, what's going on, type of thing. Thankfully, there at that location, it's very close to a hospital, and it was super early in the morning. So that side of things is fortunate. She came to the parking lot. My coworkers wheeled me out on just a desk chair because I was so not confused, so wobbly, I guess.
Because your vision was still choppy.
And that was it, though. It was just the vision that was affecting me. I still had full strength, full coordination. Any of the typical stroke symptoms were not there. So the face droop, the arm issues weren't an issue. The speech was not affected.
So you had tingling, but you still had the movement.
I still had yes. Okay. So sensation was off. Function and strength was not a problem. Got to the hospital, and I used to have a history of migraines. And so they said just what was going on. They said then there was no true stroke symptoms. They said maybe you have a severe migraine. Something's going on. Like, this is unlike anything I've ever experienced. And it's like, again, perfectly down the midline. I had this suspicion from that class. I know what's going on here, but they couldn't be sure. MRI they had 2 MRI machines. One was down, just not working. Second one was in use, and those studies, MRIs, those take a while. So time is an issue with strokes. That's the T part of FAST, right? Facial, arm, speech, time. So time is of the essence. Okay, we got to act. The neurologist recommended what's called TPA, tissue plasminogen activator, and that is a typical medicine that's administered to someone that has a clot or an ischemic stroke. The issue, though, is if you take that and you have a hemorrhagic stroke, you're gonna bleed out.
Right.
And so the issue, why that was an issue, is because they didn't know what was going on.
Because they couldn't get the MRI.
Exactly. There was no imaging.
Right.
So they opted for a CAT scan, which is okay, not conclusive enough. And with the CAT scan, they saw there's 2 of the called the vertebral arteries. You have one on the left, one on the right, and they go perfectly up your spine and kind of kink around your neck and come up into your head and then meet together. Apparently, people in general have one side that's more dominant than the other in those arteries. And so the left one, in my case, was non-existent. You couldn't see it on the imaging. And like, this could actually be normal, because that's what it is for people, apparently. But it was totally gone. Like, couldn't see it at all. And so the neurologist came back. Well, you'd just been married 9 months at this point. And she said, what do you want to do? Like, okay, well, I don't understand, like, the implications. Like, what does this mean? And she brought out this chart that's 100 stick figures. And most of them, 90 of them are green. 90 of them are white. 90 of them are white. 5 are green at the bottom. And then 5 are red. And of those red, there's 2 that there's 4, 2 on each side that are kind of a lighter red. 1 in the middle at the top that's like dark red. And so what that's indicating, showing is like 5% of the people, it'll solve everything immediately. Bounce back, good to go. 90%, it doesn't really change anything. For 5% of the people, it could be fatal. And so, we don't know what type of a stroke it is. If it's hemorrhagic, I belong in that top 5% of red.
Right.
If it's ischemic, it could be anything in between.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, for liability reasons, and I don't blame her at all, she's like, I can't make that decision for you. I was like, okay, well, if I were your son, what would you say? You should take the TPA. It's like, okay, took the TPA. So with TPA, there has to be a mandatory 48-hour monitoring period in the ICU.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Went to the ICU, and everything still had full coordination, full strength. Mobility was there. Everything was still there. And then that night, so this is Thursday, August 7th, 2014, that night, I lost everything on that right side. Became fully paralyzed from the chin down. Lost the ability to speak because my tongue muscle was just gone. Couldn't move my arm, couldn't sit up properly just because the trunk muscles were so affected.
Mm-hmm.
Couldn't move my leg, couldn't wiggle fingers or toes. And at that point, just because of the rapid decline, it was all hands on deck in the ICU.
Mm-hmm.
The neurologist had changed shifts, and so I had a new neurologist there, and he was with me 24/7 for his entire shift. It was a 24-hour shift, but he was with me every second for those next 24 hours, and then same thing, they changed over. They tried administering different medications just to increase blood flow, to put all the blood flow back into the brain.
Mm-hmm.
The nice thing about the vertebral artery is because it does kind of link those two branches left and right, they link together as one. And so sometimes if you get enough blood flow and the right pressure, it can compensate for the other side. But it wasn't happening. So they tried to give me norepinephrine, epinephrine, all these different medications, and then to thin the blood, they put me in Trendelenburg position, which is like a negative, I don't remember the degrees, but it's 20 degrees or something like that, with my head down, so that again the blood would rush to my head to try and bust through that and get everything back to where it needed to be. So that was kind of the state of things. And I ended up getting an MRI. I got a CT angiogram as well, so with contrast, which tastes so weird. I don't know. But
I don't
it's like a metallic taste. Anyway, yeah, give me the angiogram so that tracks and so you can actually see where the blood is flowing properly with the iodine that's in the contrast. And then the MRI was able to reveal the exact pinpoint of what was going on. The medulla had been deprived of blood flow in a very small area. And fortunately, and I say that with all conviction, I'm very fortunate that was just that spot, because all it took out, no cognitive function was lost, anything like that. It was strictly physical and then a little bit of the sensation up to that point.
Do you think the early application of the medicine, that decision to take it, helped in not having further damage?
Without a doubt. I can't imagine, because the medulla in your brain, there's so many different areas, right? Mm-hmm. But the medulla and the brainstem specifically, the concentration of neurons and neural pathways is so tight that the smallest amount that's taken out can affect huge things. There's a bad example, but it's like basically like the rest of your brain in your cortical area is like farmland. There's not a lot of people versus land area. Right. Does that make sense? Whereas the brainstem is like a high-rise apartment building in downtown New York City. There's tons of people there in a small area. Yeah. Similar thing with the brainstem versus the cortical, or just the other brain areas. And so the smallest area that was deprived of brain can do a lot of damage. And so without a doubt, taking that TPA to bust the clot in the medulla allowed for whatever could be recovered to eventually recover. And had I waited minutes longer, that's another high rise. And so it's just a lot of neural pathways and neurons. So I do think so. And I think that's a choice to think that way. Like, you never know, right? There's no way to know. But I like to think on that side of positivity, because that yeah, that's life,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Gotta see things that way. But yeah, so that was kind of everything leading up to the event of actually having the stroke and kind of it at its worst. But pinpointed where it was at in the brain. They were able to get me on the right balance of medications and things like that over a 3 day period. So that lasted until about Sunday, and then things stabilized. The waters calmed, and now we're able to focus on the recovery pathway versus
Hmm.
like preventive type stuff. And one of the things was like for me, because there was no pain for me at all. I didn't know. I mean, I didn't. Yeah, stuff was happening like the paralysis and the sensation loss, but there was zero pain. There was zero discomfort other than the Trendelenburg because they had me at that angle.
Right.
And the reason why it was so bad is so part of the area in the medulla is the phrenic nerve can get affected. And the phrenic nerve controls all of our automatic systems.
Hmm.
One of those being hiccups. I had hiccups every minute or so for days. And being in that position, I would hiccup and I would like slide down. They'd have to
Oh,
pull my ankles and like get me back up so I was like kinked at the bottom of the bed. And oddly, I ended up growing almost a full inch out of the ICU. And I think
wow.
it's because of
From the
that.
pulling?
Yeah, it had to be. But it threw out my back too. So that was like the only pain or discomfort was the hiccups that were caused from
I've heard of standing on your head in order to cure hiccups. I've never
hey.
thought of it
Yeah,
causing
causing it, yeah.
hiccups.
So it was just, I guess, more comical thing to look back on. But um, yeah, and then just kind of full spectrum. I was in the ICU, so I got in there Thursday in the morning, and I was there until the next Friday, so a week and a day. And then I was discharged from the ICU and put into inpatient rehab, which is speech, occupational, physical. And I was there for 2 weeks and then left the following Friday. So all in all, I was in the hospital for 22 days.
Oh.
So August 7th until August 29th. Yeah.
It's kind of interesting. I'm going to take a step back a little bit.
Yeah.
That when you went to the ER, they mentioned it might be a really bad migraine. The previous person we had talked to, she was told it might be a silent migraine with the symptoms she was having
Interesting.
because she didn't have a headache with it.
Mm.
And I find that interesting as well because you're talking about not having pain. And a lot of times we associate a stroke with a headache.
Yeah.
But here's two cases that we've talked to in a row where the headache wasn't a dominant factor in the how you realized it was a stroke.
Yeah, not at all. And one thing I remember them saying was a stroke is even more unique than a fingerprint because if you see a fingerprint, you know it's a fingerprint at least.
Right.
Whereas a stroke, it's different for everyone, presents differently, the side effects are different, the lasting effects are different, and then even the identifiers are different.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, in this case it wasn't at all. And so yeah, just another thing like that's why we need to spread the word as well because like people just need to be aware like yeah, FAST is a good acronym and like absolutely needs to be like on recall memory wise, but there's other stuff too, unfortunately. But
yeah, and with it being so unique, it's hard to know all of the symptoms, but knowing, and that's kind of the importance of this as well, right? Is bringing awareness to symptoms that we may not think of as your regular stroke symptoms.
Yeah,
you're talking about. It's good to know what the main ones are, but with them being so unique, there's so many things to be aware of. So,
yeah, for sure.
I also want to ask, because you were newly, like you said, newly married, less than a year when this happened. How was it for your wife through this time?
I mean, I know it's just in some ways a living hell. I mean, having to go through that newlywed, um, just the fear of the unknown type of thing. And then, yeah, I think it's crushing in so many ways because you have this idea and expectation of how life's gonna be and the hope. and what it can be, and what, especially being 9 months married. I mean, that's still the honeymoon phase,
Right.
quote unquote. But that gets torn down pretty quickly, and when something like this happens, and it's, I mean, life will never be the same or what it was.
Mhm.
Um, but I think, and I again, perspective for me is everything, because with that I can say, oh, I'm very grateful, and I mean that wholeheartedly, very grateful for how things happened, because they could have been and probably should have been so much worse. And fortunate for our situation, I know a lot of people aren't as fortunate. There wasn't anything cognitively affected with me, which is so lucky. It's so amazing, to where I was able to go back to school just 3 months after, 4 months after, and finish my degree, and continue, like, hold a job and continue to, like, have a normal, I mean, conversation with her, and, like,
Right.
be there emotionally where I maybe couldn't be as much physically.
Hmm.
um but being able to be that for her in other ways. But yeah, I mean, an adjustment for sure. I think the one thing to answer that as well is that time of life and everything is just full of transitions.
Hmm.
I mean, going to school is a transition. For me, it was moving out of state, attending a school, um, two major life transitions, getting married, another massive transition.
Right.
And so this one, in a way, added to the list. It's another transition in that time
Definitely.
frame. So, um, it yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that helped or hurt, but it just, I mean, it is what it is, unfortunately. Which is,
Hmm.
I don't know if I like that statement as much, but yeah, difficult for sure. Grateful though that it wasn't any worse than it was and is. Um, but yeah, still, I mean, even to this day, there's things to adjust to, new things we encounter, and now it's to the point where we know how to navigate those things together. So it's
Hmm.
just that adjusting that initial learning curve. But she's been fantastic, an absolute rock, for that exact reason, to be able to roll with the punches and adjust
Hmm.
and pull up her own bootstraps where needed, and take over where I can't anymore, which is hard to say, but yeah, that's how it is.
I think that's amazing. It speaks for her as an amazing person.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Um, with your so with ischemic stroke, because we had more experience with the hemorrhagic stroke.
Yeah,
With an ischemic stroke, it wasn't so. It was more the medicine they used as opposed to a surgery to try to.
correct.
You didn't have any type of surgery with this, correct?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up, because I forgot to explain. So the vertebral artery has, all of our arteries have three linings. The innermost lining, when I got whiplash, they believe is what tore. So
Okay.
the very inner lining of the artery is what tore. It caused turbulence in the vein. And when there's turbulence, our blood's like, oh, we gotta stop that.
Right.
And so it then caused a clot naturally, and that clot is what deprived the medulla of
Hmm.
the blood. And so for me in that case, all they needed to do was clear the clot, and the artery should heal itself. I had zero interventions as far as that goes. I had a PICC line put in, which is just to get medicine directly to the heart, but that was more to get my heart rate at the right level and
Uh-huh.
everything, rather than to actually do anything to the heart. So there was zero interventions done, no surgeries. It was just healing that artery, fixing that turbulence, and that just happens over time. But the main thing was to get rid of the clot so that it could do that by
Hmm.
itself. And yeah, and so the ischemic side is just the prevention of blood flow to an area of the brain, and that clot caused by that turbulence from the tear in the vein is what did that.
Right. So they want to get the blood flow, or more importantly, the oxygen
Yes.
flow back to the parts
Yeah.
of the brain.
Exactly.
And by administering a medicine to get rid of the clot,
Yeah.
they can start the, being stable, and then start the rehabilitation process and see where for lack of a better word, what damage has been done and how much they can repair from that.
Yes.
Okay. I really appreciate you sharing your story with us. We in the next episode, we'll talk about the rehabilitation. You talked about being in hospital or in inpatient rehab with speech, occupational and physical therapy. So we'll talk about that in the next episode. And again, thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you.